I'm making this video because these old Hitachi chain mortisers are all over eBay, but prior to buying one I really couldn't find much information about them, kind of how they worked. So I just kind of wanted to introduce the features of it. So one of the things that I like about this model, this is the CB21. I also have another used one that's the BC21SA, which appears to be basically identical. This is in contrast to some of the other models. The cool feature about this one is it has this lever here that actually slides the head back and forth to go along the length of the mortise, which allows you to cut a mortise probably on the order of, I don't know, 5 or so inches long without having to unclamp and move the whole unit down, which saves some time. So as far as the controls go, this lever is for locking it onto the beam. There's a screw clamp in the back that's spring-loaded that you can tension down to set it to the width of your beam. Unfortunately, I guess it's a symptom of these being metric and whatever the standard sizes of lumber are in Japan where these come from. This doesn't quite open up far enough, the clamp doesn't quite open up far enough to fit onto an 8-inch beam. For this project, essentially all my mortises are on the 6-inch or 4-inch sides of timbers, and therefore I haven't really had a problem with it, but that's something that I'm going to look at trying to modify in the future to make it clamp onto an 8-inch beam. So you clamp it onto the beam, and this lever moves the head back and forth, so you're really able to move it in 2 dimensions to go along the length of the mortise and the width of the mortise. Now, again, unfortunately, probably a symptom of this being metric. I'm cutting 1.5-inch mortises for everything in this project, and unfortunately this lever only moves at about 1 inch and 3/16 or 1.25 inches or so. It doesn't quite get me the full width on 1.5-inch mortise. So that's another thing, that there are some adjustments to it, but even with it opened up as far as it will go, that's all I can get out of it, which does mean that I have to move the head with the screw adjustment a little bit during each mortise, but it doesn't really turn out to be that big of a deal. Quick lever to move back and forth. This goes along the length of the mortise, and then this screw essentially fine adjusts the head back and forth. So when you're starting to cut the mortise, the screw is how you'll kind of get it lined up to hit your pencil line exactly. And then I'll chop out most of the mortise and then come back, move the head over another 1/4 inch or so to get my full width, and then go down the length of it. One of the features that I really like about this one, I know that the other popular style of mortiser is the Makita, which actually tilts the bar of the chain to lengthen the mortise rather than actually moving the entire head along the mortise. I haven't used one of those personally, but I'm really actually pretty pleased with this arrangement because you do need to lock this down whenever you plunge, or the head's gonna want to walk on you just from the motion of the chain, the cutting action of the chain on the wood. But once you have locked it, plunge it, move it along, lock it again, plunge it again, and you finish kind of going that full length, you can loosen this, drop your bar all the way down to the bottom of the mortise, and then with this loose you can just slide it along with the chain running. You can slide this along the bottom of the mortise, and that will clean up the sort of scallops from adjacent plunges, which is nice because then you can really get a flat bottom to that mortise, and the only thing that you really have to deal with at that point is the radius in the very corners at the edges at either end of the mortise. Quick demo of how I adjust this machine to along the width of the mortise to hit the pencil lines. So if you release the plunge mechanism, let the chain kind of drop down onto the surface. This is a little finicky, but if you kind of hold on to the thing and get it so that the teeth of the chain are kind of just skimming the surface, with the chain running, you can turn the screw to move the head. With the chain running, you can turn the screw to move the head back and forth until you kind of hit your pencil line on one side. And now I can go ahead and do the full plunge. Now I'll move this lever, which will bring me most of the way across the mortise, and plunge again. And then finally bring it down, skim it, and turn the screw again to hit my other pencil line. See where this would be better if the lever mechanism was able to hit the full mortise width in one shot, because then you wouldn't have to keep adjusting the screw, which means I effectively have to readjust the screw multiple times per mortise, which is a little annoying. It really only takes a couple seconds, so it's not that bad. But in theory, if this was able to hit the full mortise width in one shot, this would be kind of set it and forget it, and you could bang out a number of mortises in a row without really having to do any fine tuning. So that's something I'm going to try to sort out with some mechanical mods in the future. And you can kind of see that the bottom of the mortise is fairly flat after you do that. One final tip when using these is to pay attention to the backlash. Really where that comes into play is this screw that adjusts the whole head back and forth along the width of the mortise. When you're actually cutting and when you have the machine clamped down, there's not really any cutting forces in this direction, and so there's nothing that's really going to pull it out of alignment. But just as an example here, where this bites you is when you actually go and move the machine down the length of the mortise, because you're only going to be able to get 4 or 5 inches at a time, and usually a mortise is going to be longer than that. You got to be really cognizant when you move it not to pull the head against the other side of the backlash. This should be kind of intuitive if you're used to doing using a manual milling machine. But just as an example here, so right now I've got this adjusted to cut this inside face of this mortise here, and therefore the last time that I adjusted this screw I was pulling the head in this direction. Now that means that the backlash is going to allow this whole head, if something were to pull on it, to pull this way by a not insignificant amount. So if I go and unclamp this to move it down the mortise, when I pull on it, notice I kind of pulled towards myself a little bit. That's going to pull that head. You could probably even see it a little bit. That head slid forward a bit. Now if I go and plunge, a little hard to see, but now I'm about 1/16 of an inch past my line. It's not where I want to be. So what you're going to want to do is anytime you move the machine down the length of your timber, you're just going to want to be cognizant of which direction the backlash allowed it to move out of position, and push it back against that backlash. Take up that backlash to put it back in line, so that you're back on the same adjustment point as you were before.